It was a full moon night with a crystal sky full of glittering stars in the early 19th century. The hot summer breeze offered little respite for the 1,500-odd men, women, and children who had gathered at the central village in Kuldhara in the heart of the Thar Desert in the western Indian state of Rajasthan, assembling meticulously through the evening from the cluster of 84 surrounding villages. They were all Paliwal Brahmins, an ancient Hindu clan famed as much for their business acumen as for their agrarian innovation. Their ancestors had migrated to what is now western Rajasthan towards the end of the 13th century and set up the sprawling community of Kuldhara and its adjoining villages. Thanks mainly to their ability to grow bumper crops in the arid desert climate, the Paliwals' prosperity and spirit of kinship with the surrounding communities grew manifold over the next few centuries until that fateful night in 1825. It should have been a night of celebration and harmony. It was Rakha Bandhan, the Hindu festival, when a sister ties a thread on the wrists of her brothers to symbolize the eternal bond between siblings. But on this night, the distraught Paliwal fraternity stared instead at disharmony and disintegration. Some historians faintly trace the roots of the tragedy about the unfold in Kuldhara to the machinations of a contemporary powerful minister of the state of Jaisalmer, Salim Singh, who allegedly fell in love with the beautiful daughter of Kuldhara village chief and was desperate to marry her. Singh gave a deadline of 2 days and threatened the Paliwals that if his request was denied, the villagers would be burdened with massive taxes that would essentially cripple the agrarian community. However, in the ultra-conservative Paliwal Brahmin society, getting a woman married outside the clan would be the ultimate act of dishonor and disgrace. And so, with Singh's deadline about to expire, the entire clan gathered at Kuldhara at night. By the next morning, they had all disappeared. It was as if every single resident of the Paliwal community had vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but their memories and mementos. Nobody saw them leave, and to date, no one has discovered any trail of mass migration to a possible distant land. It was a night in history that has continued to baffle historians and the Indian society at large, spawning a range of conspiracy theories from metaphysical to mundane, with no clear answers in sight nearly 200 years after the disappearance of more than 1,500 people from the face of the earth. Except that Kuldhara has in recent years gained prominence in history as a haunted hub of paranormal activities, inhabited by spirits and forever carrying the Paliwals' curse of death and destruction should anyone attempt to settle there. We have collected significant anomalies and evidence to suggest that there is something really going on in Kuldhara, which cannot be explained by a single scientific theory, said Reverend Gaurav Tiwari, the founder of the Indian Paranormal Society. Incidentally, Tiwari died under mysterious circumstances at his home in Dwarka, New Delhi, this month, a few weeks after he spoke to Weekend Review for this article, and investigations into his death are underway. The Indian Paranormal Society had grabbed headlines a few years ago when it sent a team of 30 volunteers to spend a night at the abandoned village. We have organized several night campaigns at Kuldhara. Though we survived the nights, one can't deny that something unusual happens there. Disembodied whispers, screams, noises are common at dark hours. Many of our members have witnessed apparitions, heard footsteps, experienced unusual touch, and so on. But no one has been harmed or hurt in any of our expeditions there, he said. Tiwari claimed that the real aim of his society's trips was to dismantle the myths surrounding the village and encourage more people to visit, even though he believed not everything that happened in Kuldhara has a rational explanation. The Indian Paranormal Society is always focused on finding out a reason for an unexplained event. At Kuldhara, we monitored a lot of such unexplained electromagnetic fields, EMFs, that responded to our communication. We captured disembodied voices, found variations in temperature and static charges. There was one instance when handprints of a child started appearing on the parked vehicles in front of our eyes. This was also captured and witnessed by many journalists. We believe that these ruins are haunted, he said, before scrambling to a list of glossary of instruments his team used to capture such apparently abnormal activity. From infrared and full-spectrum cameras and CCTVs to EMF meters, EVP recorders, thermal imagers, motion sensors, REM pods, and static detectors. The ruins of the village, about 20 kilometers from Rajasthan's tourist hub of Jaisalmer, are today a protected monument under the Archaeological Survey of India, ASI, and a daytime visit would certainly reinforce such theories, should you dare to visit. While a daily flock of bewildered tourists besieges the village during the day, no one is allowed to stay in the area after 6 p.m. or sunset, one of the preconditions of the visit enforced by tourism officials. Once in the village, old men with wrinkled faces and sunken eyes appear out of nowhere like ageless apparitions and beseech you to sit patiently as they narrate the tragic tale of a ghost town. Climb up the rickety stairs of one of the many terraces still intact, and the vast stretch of ramshackle houses, crumbling blocks of ancient brick walls, narrow bylanes, intact wells, ruined town squares, and underground structures set amid the parched earth reveal a landscape both sublime and surreal. It's hardly a wonder that the lines between history, folklore, myth, and paranoia blur at the place such as this, leaving you with an eerie experience never felt before. Tawari said that while a majority of the villagers living near Kuldhara did believe the village was haunted, a small majority suspect a more sinister motive behind branding the village as such. Many of the villagers swear that they have had very horrifying experiences at this place after dark. But some people feel that this was only a rumor to get Kuldhara a heritage site tag and ensure there are less public interference of tourist influx. Some also believe that there is a huge bounty of treasure and gold hidden under the ruins of Kuldhara. That theory is partly corroborated by Kamal Singh Bhatti, a member of the Jaisalmer Vikas Samiti, JVS, or the Jaisalmer Development Society, an NGO dedicated to the conservation of ancient heritage sites in Jaisalmer and its surroundings. In 1977, there was a house in Kuldhara where a Japanese archaeologist team found gold and other expensive items. The government took possession of the items, Bhatti said. But Bhatti also throws in a more mundane explanation of Kuldhara's unsolved mystery. When the Paliwal Brahmins settled in Kuldhara, lucrative trade consignments for what are now Pakistan and Afghanistan used to pass through Jaisalmer. After Vasco da Gama traced a new sea route to the Indian subcontinent, trade on the Silk Route declined, affecting the business of the Paliwals. Against this backdrop, the Diwan, minister of the then ruler of Jaisalmer, wanted to impose steep taxes on the Paliwals, which they were not in a position to pay. Further, the minister wanted to marry a girl from the Paliwal community. Since intercaste marriages were not allowed, the Paliwal Brahmins asked the minister for a respite of 2 months, during which they connected with community members in and around Jaisalmer and decided to leave the villages. People from all 84 villages left on the night of the Rashka Bandhan and settled in other parts of the country, based on their businesses, he said. There's an explanation that Ajay Kumar Upadhyaya, a longtime teacher at the senior secondary school in Jaisalmer, largely concurs with. The Paliwals were a prosperous community with advanced knowledge of agriculture and town planning. They knew the technique of cultivating water-intensive crops such as wheat in a desert, and their irrigation system, known as Kadin, is still taught as part of the Rajasthan state government's education curriculum. The local kings used to bother them, and they left simply because of that. They are now spread all over Rajasthan, he said. Yet more mundane reasons behind the disappearance of the Paliwals can be gathered from the historical anecdotes, since no authentic written records exist of the community itself. Originally the inhabitants of Pali and Rajasthan, hence the community name, the Paliwals' wealth became the subject of constant conflict between the tribes in the adjoining Aravalli Mountains and the Delhi Sultanate. The threatened community fled Pali in 1291 to settle down in Kuldhara, where each family was welcomed into the 84 villages with a brick and a gold coin from every family in the village. The brick was used to build a house, and the gold was meant for starting a business or a farm. But then history repeated itself after a few centuries. The prosperous Paliwals became the target of Mughal invaders. During a raid in the 18th century, the wells of the strictly vegetarian Brahmin Paliwals were said to have been contaminated by animal carcasses by the Mughals, forcing the community towards a mass exodus from Kuldhara. While Bhatti and Upadhyaya both acknowledge such possibilities to explain the Kuldhara conundrum, they vehemently disagree on the so-called paranormal problem. Upadhyaya said irrespective of what happened to the Paliwals, they cursed the land and that's why it is haunted. Nobody goes there after 6 p.m. I have heard reports of lurking spirits. Bhatti plainly dismisses the idea of paranormal. I have been to Kuldhara many times, but have never seen anything paranormal. I have spent so many nights there, but didn't see anything. The secretary of JVS, Chandra Prakesh Vyas, agrees. I don't believe that there are any paranormal activities in the village. I spent several nights in Kuldhara with people who went there to check if the place was haunted. I never saw anything. I cooked and stayed with laborers while we were working there, he said. Vyas also disputes Indian Paranormal Society and Tiwari's version, with whom he claims to have spent several nights at the village. I cannot challenge science. I spent many nights in the village with Guru Ram Tiwari, but I didn't experience anything, he said. While the origins of the Paliwals remain undisputed, their fate following the mass migration on the full moon night of August 1825 still remains unclear. If that theory of disappearance is subscribed to, historians say some Paliwal clans and Ruputs, whose ancestors migrated the northern Indian state of Uttar Pradesh. In turn, these families moved to the adjoining states of Uttarakhand and Bihar, where pockets of Paliwal patriarchs still rule the roost. Yet other members of the Paliwal community remain scattered within the desert state of Rajasthan. But questions still linger. Questions such as why no one noticed even a small group of migrants, or how could 1,500 people travel without anyone acknowledging their presence? And why is there no recorded historical text of what actually happened in Kuldhara?